Today you'll see 2 easy to sew knit dresses with these really cool side panels and 2 different ways to finish a V neckline on a knit garment, and it all depends on your fabric choice. Practical sewing as always. Keep watching. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing, and I'm coming today from the jungle of my backyard. Honestly, the grass is so high. I just really hope I don't step onto any nasty bugs while I'm filming here. Today I've got some knit sewing to show you. You know, I like to alternate woven projects, knit projects, all types of sewing, and the knit dress I've chosen to share with you today is quite different to ones I've shown you in the past, just because of the style, the way the pattern pieces come together. It's just really fun to sew. This is the Claudia dress from Sinclair Patterns, and the style of this dress is a classic that a lot of us like. A sort of semi-fitted bodice with a skirt that sort of flares out, but it's not your typical bodice that finishes at the waist. There's no princess seams here, but it's just very unique. And you have a different type of V neckline that is slightly wider and more curved, but still finishes in a V, and the way you finish this V is different according to your fabric choice, but I'll get to that later. The fit is fitted at the shoulders and the bust, semi-fitted at the waist, and then you have some more space at the hips because it does flare out a little bit. And what's interesting are those side panels. They are super cool to sew. You can use contrast fabric there if you want to. If you don't want to use contrast fabric, it still really helps with the shaping there, and just something different to sew basically. I'm always looking for styles that are different, and this one is certainly different. As for the sleeves, there is a flutter sleeve option there. In my case, even though I do like a flutter sleeve, I prefer something sleeveless because it means I can wear it all year long. It's always easier to layer on something with a sleeveless top for me because I don't have the bulk of the sleeve underneath a cardigan or a jacket or things like that. But that's just personal preference. So the 2 dresses you'll see from me are going to be sleeveless with a modified armhole because this armhole is meant to have that sleeve there. The other feature that I like about this dress is the back piece. You can choose whether you want to cut the back piece on the fold and just have a straight back. That will give you more room at the waist and will give you a shape at the back that's not so defined. But also, if you want to have a shaped waist, there is another little cut line there that is shaped that will go in at the small of the back and then back out to the hips. So I really love those options, and I always like the option that gives you that shape at the small of the back. This is what I try to achieve sometimes with adding darts and things. So if this knit garment has that shaping feature into there, I am not going to ignore it and just cut the back on the fold, even though it is an option and it is a preference that you might have if you want something more relaxed, more loose fitting. Especially when the skirt flares out, I do like to have that definition there at the waist if possible. And the fact that the pattern provides it is awesome. There are different cut lines for the length. You can make this as a tunic, as above the knee or below the knee. I've made a dress that hits me above the knee because that is my preferred length. The Claudia dress and all the other patterns on the Sinclair Patterns website are 20% off. There is an Easter sale running through the 6th. You will see the discount when you have things in your cart at the checkout, so you won't see the discount there on the website, but once you're ready to pay, then you'll see the discount there. And I always confirm, I always check that everything's working well before I tell you about it. I have my affiliate link down below in the description box if you are interested in getting some of these lovely patterns for a little bit less, and I'll also leave you my playlist. With all the patterns I've made from this brand, and I've absolutely loved them all. Always had great results with the fit and the techniques, the instructions, everything. So have a look if you're interested. Now let's talk a little bit about the fabric. I mentioned that the way that you finish your V neckline will differ according to your fabric choice. You obviously need knit fabrics for this garment. Now whether they're light or heavy is up to you, but it needs to stretch at least 30 to 50% horizontally. You also do want some vertical stretch. As for the light fabrics, you could go the route of the rayon spandex, bamboo spandex, modal spandex, ITY, double brush poly. Those are light fabrics that are going to work for this dress. Now, I would stay away from rayon spandex. That is a solid color. I'm not sure, I just don't like the way it looks on the body. Unless you wear a slip underneath, it tends to be quite clingy. So when I sew rayon spandex, I try to use printed fabrics. So if you're using a lightweight fabric, the way you finish your V neckline is with a FAUX V neckband. So I've seen this a lot in ready to wear. It's super easy, super fast, much easier to sew than the regular neckband that has that shape, you know, it's just so much easier. So I've gone ahead and followed the pattern. I say, why not? I'm using a rayon spandex, it will work. And I haven't shown you this on the channel. It is sort of like a shortcut way to do a V neckband that is going to look nice, but the fabric does have to be light for it. You can't do this technique on a fabric that's heavy. I would not do this on a cotton spandex. Actually, I would not make this dress with a cotton spandex. I don't think it would drape nice. I just don't think it would look nice, but that's just my opinion. So that is one of the ways you can finish your neckline that is included in the pattern and the instructions, and you have a neckband piece for that. And then if you go to the heavier medium weight fabrics like Liverpool, Ponte Roma, some athletic knits, maybe some French terry, then there's the option to finish this V neckline with a facing. And the way you treat this is the same as you would a woven garment. You interface your facing, you sew it on, you do the understitching. The whole thing is exactly the same, and that will work perfectly with a fabric that has more body to it, more weight. I'm very happy to do a facing on these types of fabrics. I would have not been happy to do a facing on a light fabric. Line might tend to gape because these fabrics tend to be stretchier, have less recovery, and even if the interface, I just don't think the facing finish is good for lightweight fabrics. So I'm very happy that this pattern offers you all the options, that you can use a wide variety of knit fabrics, and that it gives you the appropriate V neckline finish for both of them. I've actually sewn both types of necklines, and I'll be sharing those with you. I will actually pop this video into my V neckline series that I've had for a little while. I've touched on woven styles and knit styles, and I'll just slip this into there as knit V styles that are also options if you want to try them. The sizes available in this pattern are from 0 to 22 US, and of course you have the height files, the petite, the regular, and the tall files. That is actually the file that you choose first according to your height, and then you look at the body measurements and choose your actual size. From sizes 0 you start at a BC cup size, and then all the way to size 22 you end up with an E cup size. So I'm very happy that even though this is a knit garment, there are cup sizes in the drafting, and it just means that the fit is going to be so good. As I mentioned, it's fitted at the shoulders and the bust. So you have negative ease there, meaning that the garment will be smaller than you at the bust area by about 3 inches. Then you do have some positive ease at the waist, meaning that you do have extra space at the waist, around 3 inches. And then at the hips, you have about 7 to 8 inches of positive ease. You need to choose your base size based on your bust so that this top area fits well, and then you can either blend out if you have a larger waist size or blend in, same as the hips. There are diagrams in the pattern instructions showing you how to blend between sizes. In my case, I sew a straight size 16, and the only fitting adjustment I did was actually a length adjustment, and that's just for personal preference. There is 3 length options here: the tunic, above the knee, and below the knee. On the below the knee, I made that an inch shorter, and that hits me above the knee. I think if I'd chosen the above the knee version, it would have been too short for me. I'll divide up close and sew personal into 2, and I'll show you the garment separately. First we'll see the rayon spandex version, where I'm going to show you how to sew that FAUX V neckband and also the side panels, which is something that you don't typically see. You also see there how I adjusted the armhole to make it sleeveless. I'm just raising it to make myself have more cover there. So let's hop into part 1 of Up Close and Sew Personal.
Don't you think this is starting to wear on me? You've been rated down like hell.
This is the front pattern piece. This is one that's cut on the fold right there, and you can see it has this different shape because that's where the side panel will be sewn on later. What I wanted to show you was the modified armhole. I just do this by eyeballing, and I'd rather be safe than sorry. So just to be safe, I raised it by an inch there, and then I taper the curve back into the original width up here on the top, and I do the exact same change here on the back. and then I try on and see if I like that. I'd rather have more length here up closer to my armpit than less, because I always like a really high closed armhole on my sleeveless garments. That is something that I do directly on the fabric. I don't draw another pattern piece, so you might want to try that if you like doing sleeveless things. I find that the original armhole that is drafted to have a sleeve will be lower, and it will be lower than what I want it to be sleeveless as. These are the two main pieces from the dress. They look very different. This is the front, it's cut on the fold right there, and then you can see the V neckline, the armhole, a partial side seam there, and this is the back neckline, armhole, partial side seam, and then you have this shape going in. And so you would construct this like any other top that you're making. You do your shoulder seams, you do these little side seams, you finish your neckline, all those bits, and then you're going to have this shape right there. And that's where this comes to play. These are the side panels, the Godets pieces. There's actually two pairs mirrored, and you can see I've got pins there along the edge, along the straight edge. That's going to be a side seam. And then once you open it, you have a shape that will go in between here. I'll open one up so you can see. Okay, so there you can see one of these open. There's another one that will go on the other side, but there will be a seam there in the center, and that will be the seam that is the side seam that will unite over there. And that curved area will unite over here. So it'll be super fun to put together, a great opportunity to use two different types of fabric. This is a muslin that I'm making before I use a really pricey fabric. These are scraps. I'll show you how to sew this side panel when we get to that stage. I've sewn the center back seam, the shoulder seams, these little side seams right there. Now this is the neckband that's in the pattern. I've cut it out just as it is. I did measure it before, and it's about 85% of the circumference, so I'm very happy with that. And I've divided my neckband into 4. So these are the halves, and then I've got 2 more pins here marking the quarters. And I've done the same with my neckband. Now there is a center back seam there. I don't like putting the back seam of the neckband right there. I think it's too bulky. So I move it off to the side a little bit. So this is where I'm going to place the center back. Now this doesn't have a traditional V neckband, it's a fake one, and it's way easier to sew. It'll have a little trick at the end. You'll see a lot of this in ready to wear. It works well with lightweight fabrics. I would not do this with a heavy weight, but there is that V right there, and I'll match this up right here. And basically it'll be sewn on as a regular round neckband would be. You just have to be careful at the V point right there, but it'll be sewn sort of in the same way. Stretching the neckband as you go to match the neckline that's underneath, not stretching the neckline, of course, just the neckband. So I'll be careful when I go around this V area, but it'll be basically like sewing around neckline. I'm using a shallow zigzag stitch. So I'm going to start somewhere on the front neckline. Here's the shoulder seam. Below there, that was the first quarter. After doing the first couple of stitches, I'll make sure that I'm stretching this as I go. You can see this is where the next pin is, and this is actually where the V is. Make sure the neckband has the raw edges together. They tend to want to move around. Okay, once we get to this V, we'll just try to ignore that it's a V a little bit. And it's good that this uses a small seam allowance because it makes it easier to sew. So I'll sew up to that pin and then readjust. And leave the needle in and just move everything around. Make sure I'm not getting a pucker under there. Move all this excess out of the way. It's like doing a little bit of a pivot here. And now I'll keep going, stretching the band until I meet the other quarter point there. That pin, and here is my next quarter point that I need to stretch to, and this will involve the shoulder seam. Make sure the seam allowance at the bottom is facing towards the back. This is the bottom of the V. You can see it's rounded right now, but you can see I was able to sew the V pretty well on the other side. I'm going to serge the raw edges together, and then I'll be back to finish off this V section. Okay, here we have this neckband. Up to here it looks pretty normal, but you can see you can't leave this. This V neckline, you can't just leave it like that. There is this excess here you know, you need this V to form. This is a shortcut way to do a V that is so easy, much easier than doing the traditional V neckband that has the point on the V band as such. And this trick works also with wovens that are very light. I've done this with tops that have chiffon, just light things. So you would fold this at the center front right there. And then here is where you would do that little V right there. So you would do a diagonal stitch from the edge there up to where the seam is. So not through here, just up to there. And this is where you need to be super careful. Basically what this does is it forms your V from the back like that, and then you have this little bit dangling inside, but because it's a lightweight knit, you can't really see it. If you look at t-shirts in shops, you'll see this a lot because obviously this is much faster and easier to do than the traditional one. So these two edges need to meet really well. You don't want one higher than the other right there. And I would actually be very happy to do this by hand actually. Drop the needle right there, I'm happy with that. And then I'm going to sew right up to where the seam is. Take this pin out, it's black unfortunately, but that's where I see the stitch line. I'm going to finish right there on that point there. So my stitching reaches right up to that seam line. I haven't back tacked or done anything bulky there. I just left some threads and I'll just do some knots here, simple knots, nothing too fancy. Anything that will secure this but will not be bulky is good. At the top here, I also didn't back tack. I just left them like that, and I'll bring it to the other side. I'll use a big needle and just bring one of them to the other side so I can knot them the same on the same side. Far away from the edge there so you can't see it from the front of the garment. Once you press it, it's going to be so neat. You would trick anyone into thinking you did the real V-neck band here, but it's a shortcut one. And you have that at the back, but you can just press this open. No one will see it, no one's going to know, and it's just a way that will work with light fabrics like this. Okay, here we have the top part of the dress. You can see all that's done. I've got raw armholes still, but that's the last thing I'm going to do. Here are the short side seams sewn and serged, and then you have this going on, all these two edges. So just choose one of them, it doesn't matter which one, just open this up. I have a pair here of those panels and I've sewn the straight edge. You can see there's a curved edge. That's not the one you need to sew, it's a straight one. And this seam will be the side seam. This curve is the one that will be sewn onto this curve. Place this top part with the seam there where you can see it. Right sides together with this one. Match those seams, they have to match really well. And then you have to go following along the curve. Now on the side panel you'll see a notch. I've got a yellow notch there, and on here I have a red little notch right there. Curved seams are a little bit fiddly. This area where these seams meet is the most important. So this is how one of the sides will look. It will have this inserted there in between this seam and that seam. If you do it with a contrast color, you'll see it. If you do it all with the same print, you won't see it that much, but it will look really nice on because this will give just the right amount of volume around the hip and it won't make it so full either. It looks quite different to other things that you're used to sewing. Here's a tiny little side seam with the panel already pinned into the curve. I'll start on that end, go up, around and finish on the other side. And then I'll do the exact same thing to this other side here that is still empty. If you followed me sewing any other knit projects, you know that I sew everything on my sewing machine and I only use my serger to clean up the edges. My serger doesn't have the capacity to hold a seam on its own, but a lot of you I know might do that. So in that case, you do this with the serger. It'll just be much faster for you than it is for me. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and I've got my 1/4 inch presser foot here. The pattern uses a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I think it's assuming that you're using only your serger, but I'm able to sew it a 1/4 inch with this presser foot and then serge perfectly fine. Here's where I'm almost reaching the top here of the side seam. Sewing this curved area with a 1/4 inch seam allowance is very helpful. Make sure you don't get anything underneath there. It's very easy for the fabric to want to make folds and excess in a curved seam. Okay, that's how it looks sewn. Nice and smooth. And now let's just check on the right side. And the seams match really well. You can see they're both in the same level. So now I just repeat the exact same thing on this other side. Serge these raw edges. When I have such a tiny seam allowance sewn with a machine, I just make sure that my blade doesn't touch anything and that I don't trim it any smaller. I can perfectly serge this without trimming away anything. I don't have the capacity to move the blade anywhere, so my very basic old serger can still do whatever I want it to do. I just have to be careful to not trim anything. What I like about this style is that you can use different fabrics for those side panels, and I did exactly that for this one. I made it from a leftover rayon spandex I had from another project. I had just enough for the front and the back, but not for the side panels or for the sleeves or anything like that. I have finished my sleeveless armholes with a binding technique that I have shown before in my masterclass. It's a type of binding that you cut and you fold over and you sew it on folded so that the edge inside is nice and clean and folded. So I don't have a raw edge that's serged or raw or anything, you know, it's double, and I like that technique with light knits. So I'll leave that video linked down below and the minutes in that video where you can see that technique. I do love that technique for necklines and armholes in light fabrics like this. Here is the fake V neckband that you saw me do. It's very neat. It looks just like a V neckband that you would sew traditionally. That takes a few more steps, only this is way faster. And inside you have that sneaky little excess, and you can't tell it's there. It's appropriate for a light knit like this, and I wouldn't hesitate to do this. I also wouldn't hesitate to do the traditional neckband. This angle here is wider, so it's not a straight V that is narrower here on the tip. It's wider, and the angle you have here and there is larger than 90 degrees. So that means I would have to draft a different type of V neckband to fit this neckline. So that's why I didn't go ahead and make my own templates and all of that. I'd have to do something different with the angle there for it to lie right. If I use the ones that I have that are more narrow, it's just going to pull this in and it's going to tug here and it's not going to look nice. So I followed the instructions and used the band that is there, and it works for a light knit and it looks perfect. So it is a shortcut way that you could do a V neckband without the fuss. Here you see this black rayon spandex scrap that I also had on the side panel. You saw how to sew that curve and that the seams match there. I have the seam allowances going in different directions here to avoid bulk, and that's how it just goes down all the way down. At the back I do have my shaped center back seam, as you saw. You can see the seam is right there, and it's just a very simple dress that fits so well. It's really my style. I like this type of skirt that flares out a little bit but not excessive, you know, it's not a circle skirt or anything like that. And it's exactly the type of dress that I like to throw on to go around in the house, to go out, to go anywhere and feel amazing. So this is rayon spandex. I haven't hemmed it, I just cut it really neatly. Let's see how this one looks on. Very simple styling as always. This is my wearable muslin for the Claudia dress, size 16 tall file in rayon spandex, made from scraps, and I have a black rayon spandex on the side panels. You can see up closer where the panel on the side starts, below the bust, and you can clearly see the shape with this contrast fabric right there. This comes in, you can see part of the black here on the sides, and then it gives that volume to the skirt that is only mild and exactly what I like. I did not hem this, it's just cut really neatly, and I think it drapes really nicely, and I think you can get away with that with rayon. I did choose to have a back seam with the shaping there, and you can really tell it goes in and then back out, and I think it's a nice feature that I would not want to skip. Here's my V neckband that is totally fake. It has a little seam in there that is not apparent from the outside, and because it's a light knit you can't tell, and it doesn't bother me. I can see it if I look inside, but it is a shortcut way that could work with fabrics like this. This is the armhole that I wanted, very nice and closed under here, very nice and closed everywhere, and it's always a sleeveless armhole I'm after. So raising it from there by an inch, that's why it was important for me to make this wearable muslin, to make sure this was perfect when I went ahead and made the other one in the more valuable type of fabric. But lovely. I love the sleeveless, can never go wrong. And I think the flutter sleeves will also be super pretty, so I'm not saying I don't like them, I just like sleeveless a lot more. This is the type of dress I would wear all the time around the house and to go out, and just depending on the fabric choice it could look different. This one's very flowy, very drapey, because rayon spandex is like that, and that's what I like about it. I do have a slip underneath. I would never wear a dress like this that is like clingy in this material without a fitted slip underneath. It just is always better with a slip. Super happy with this, and after making this I was 200% happy to cut into my more valuable fabric. For Up Close and So Personal Part 2, you will see my athletic knit version, which is more structured. I would say it's a medium to heavyweight fabric. It still does have a nice drape. And for this dress, I'm sewing the facing. You usually see in patterns that facings come like this, and then on this area you would put it on the fold. The same for the back. I just find it more accurate to create a whole piece and to cut it in a single layer without putting it on the fold. Sometimes when you put it on the fold, the excess fabric there just makes this area wider without you wanting it to be. I just like to extend it, and I'm block fusing as well. I have fused a piece of knit interfacing onto this so I can cut it out for the front and the back. Before sewing the shoulder seams of the dress, I have serged the edges separately because I will be pressing the shoulder seams open. Just because there's a facing there, I just don't want that bulk there or the seam to be going to one side. So that is something different, and that is what I would do with a woven. It's the same thing I'm doing with this structured knit. I'm quickly sewing the shoulder seams of the dress. I have already stabilized the back seam with a piece of fusible interfacing that is not knit, that is just not going to stretch. 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now I'm sewing the shoulder seams of the facing, the same 1/4 inch seam allowance. For the facing, I'll be pressing the seam open, and same as for the dress for this case, because I don't want that bulk at the shoulder seams. So that's how it'll be hidden inside. You don't need to finish those edges. Here is my facing pinned onto the neckline. I've drawn a dot exactly there where I need to pivot, so it's easier. I will be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and my 1/4 inch presser foot. This facing, it being interfaced, just makes it really nice to work with. There's no drama here actually, and there's nothing different you need to do here than with a woven V facing. There is the V snip into it, but not through the seam, right there. And then this is curved, so little snips are in order here. Let me tell you how much I love that this pattern has a 1/4 inch seam allowance for the neckline and everywhere. It's so nice. You don't have to trim away seam allowance or any bulk because it's already gone. It wasn't there to begin with. Now we understitch, the same as always, seam allowance towards the facing there, that direction, so it's coming this way. I will start about a 1/4 inch away from that V. I will actually put a pin there so I can see where the V point is. There is a yellow pin marking the V. Where I don't want to start, I'll start like a 1/4 inch further from there. Here's the pin marking the V, and I'll stop about there, 1/4 inch before it. That is the V section there. You can see that understitching starts and stops a little further from there. But when you flip this in, it'll look super nice. This is like a wide open V. I really like the shape. If you don't want to top stitch the facing, you could always just sew in this seam, catching both of these, sew it down inside the shoulder seam so you wouldn't see the seam. Or you could hand tack that down there just at the shoulder seams. And because there is a center back seam on my version, you could also tack it down there. but I think I want to top stitch this one. I'm at the ironing board, I've pressed the facing, tidied it up, putting the pins all around, keeping the neckline flat right on the ironing board is very comfortable for me. It is at a height that I feel good working with. So I go ahead and pin all the way around, and while the neckline is there flat on the ironing board, I grab my needle and thread and hand baste this while it's there. When I put my needle through, I'm not going to catch the ironing board. I have this like really dense fabric covering the ironing board, so my needle can't go through there and catch it, so I'm only catching the neckline. And I can see what I'm doing. I've got my magnetic pin dish there handy, so I can go dropping the pins I don't need anymore, and I just hand baste this all around. Doing all of this process while keeping the neckline super flat makes me confident that I'm not going to have a shifted facing or puckers or anything like that. So now I'll just head over to the sewing machine and top stitch this neatly. I will be basting what I sew from the inner edge of the serged stitch there. It's very neat, and I'll just follow that all around, being careful where to pivot, and I'll be just using a normal straight stitch for this. I didn't back stitch where I started and stopped sewing this facing. I threaded both of the threads here with a large needle, and I'll just pull this back. And this is exactly what I do with woven facings as well. I don't want the bulk of the machine going back and forth, and I'll just grab all of these threads and make a simple knot here. So you can see that you can do this facing very neatly on a fabric that's got more structure. I've actually got dresses in my wardrobe that I've made in Ponte Roma, and they do have facings inside, and they're very neat and it finishes really well. Sometimes our neckband is just not the best way to finish the neckline on fabrics that are thicker and more structured. I think a facing works really well, and you can see that the steps that I took are exactly the same I would do with a woven, or the same. So this is a supplex. It's an athletic knit, and it's quite pricey. These fabrics are super pricey, so I do have a few in my stash that are sort of precious to me, and I know that whatever dress or garment I make with them are going to be one of my favorites. That's why I made the wearable scrap muslin version, just to check that everything was perfect, and then I could cut into this other one. I still love this one. It's just less valuable, you know, because the fabric is less pricey and it's a scrap. Look, you can see how heavy this is. It's just totally different. It has amazing stretch. I mean, it stretches so well. And this fabric would be good for leggings, anything really. I just love making garments out of this because it's an athletic material that is super wicking. It's super soft on the skin and comfortable to wear. And the V neckline with the facing worked beautifully. For the binding on the armhole here, I did it differently because the fabric is thicker. I just cut a long strip that was 3/4 of an inch tall, sewed it onto the right side of the fabric with 1/4 of an inch, and then flipped it to the inside. That raw edge there is serged, and then I top stitched. So very easy to do, much easier than the double binding. I found less fiddly, but this is appropriate because the fabric is heavier. I would not want to do something like this in a single layer with my rayon spandex version. That would not look good. That's why I do that one double. So I love this. It's got the same center back. Here I don't have contrast side panels. They are the same fabric, but maybe you can see where the seams meet there. But the shaping and the style is still there, and it's just a beautiful dress. It looks different, it feels different. It's less drapey. I think the skirt has a little bit more volume going out, but it's so lovely, so lovely. I really love it. And no fitting adjustments other than changing the length of the dress at the bottom. And that's the nice thing about sewing with these patterns, because Sinclair has those height files, and choosing the tall file just means I'm not going to have issues here. I've always just had a great result, and that makes the process super relaxing for me. I know they're going to fit. I still made a muslin, but mainly to check the armhole depth here that had the coverage that I wanted, because I wanted this one perfect. Here's my second Claudia dress, same size, 16 tall file, only this time the fabric is more structured. It's an athletic knit, pretty bold print, but I always love a black background. I've got the same red shoes. This one just does not have the side panels in a contrast color. I still have the sleeveless, and my V looks the same from afar, but actually has a facing. Here it is up closer. You can't really see the panels here, but they are there and they give it that shaping. I have the same seam at the center back that I really love, how it does bring it in at the small of the back. and the skirt is just lovely, just enough volume to look super pretty, not be a full skirt, it's just perfect. This V is a little lower because the facing takes away a little bit of seam allowance here when you flip it in. It's a 1/4 inch. The one I did with the fake band ends up a little taller like this, but still very nice, all in good depth. I'm showing absolutely nothing, and the fit is nice and fitted up here, and I love this armhole. Of course, making the adjustment on the muslin first was really reassuring, so I can know that this one was going to be just as nice in this fabric. That was a tad precious to me. So happy with this dress, it's amazing. I love the colors in it, I love the feel on the body, the fit, everything. Sewing it a second time is always even nicer. I rarely make muslins on knit dresses, but for this dress I thought it was worth making a muslin before cutting into this special fabric for sure. Especially to check the neckline and armholes. Some things you just can't fix after the fact, and those things sometimes you want to check. So happy. This is a happy dress. Just look at the print. It's tropical but with red and orange in there. So nice. I think if you enjoy these styles of dresses, you are going to really like this one. I think it's a style that fits really well, has special features there that are pretty and different with those side panels, and I love the option of sewing the neckline in different ways according to your fabric choice. That is always good because it gives the pattern so many possibilities and you're not just stuck to one technique and one type of fabric. So I really enjoy that about this project, and I'm sure I'll make more of these in the future. This is exactly the style of dress I like to wear daily, so it's a perfect match for what I like. Remember, all of Sinclair patterns are 20% off through the 6th. That is Tuesday, the Easter sale going on, so you can go ahead and have a look and maybe get your favorites for a little bit less. My affiliate link is always down below. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.